யாதம் உரே யாவரும் கேடீர்.
செம்மொழி வலையொலி யூடியூப் சேனல். இந்த சேனலின் மூலமாக, அந்த வலையொலியின் மூலமாக பல்வேறு தகவல்களை தினந்தோறும் நாங்கள் வழங்கி கொண்டிருக்கக்கூடிய அந்த நிலையில் முழுமையாக கண்டு பார்க்கலாம்.
He confesses that when he started translating the Sangam poems, he found that there were many that he would have liked to have written himself, and that he did not translate out of love but out of envy, out of a kind of aggression towards them. William Walsh, one of the critics, Western critics, contends that A.K.Ramanujam is too deeply possessed of the Indian ethos and psyche in its pure Hindu form to be capable of the detachment from the Indian scene that Nazim Ezekiel is capable of. This learned critic fails to realize that in Ezekiel's case, because of his Jewish heritage vis-a-vis Indian background, the dominant theme is a search for roots, a quest for identity, whereas in Ramanujam's case, it is an agonizing struggle with one's deep-rooted past. Also, as Bruce King has pointed out, another critic, Ramanujam does show remarkable objectivity and detachment in as much as he proves to be neither a nostalgic traditionalist nor an advocate of modernization and westernization. In fact, Ramanujam's concern with his Indian past is a source of strength, for one would do well to remember, as D.H. Lawrence has stated in a different context, all creative art must rise out of a specific soil and flicker with a spirit of place. Ramanujam had the added advantage of being equally at home in two Indian languages with rich literatures to their credit, namely Tamil and Kannada. Driven by inner compulsion rather than monetary or other considerations, he started Englishing the poems he admired and brought them out in collections such as 15 poems from a classical Tamil anthology, The Interior Landscape, Hymns for the Drowning, and Poems of Love and War. Their success was astounding, and all the earlier versions of these poems, all the earlier translations of these poems by native scholars paled into insignificance. He has an edge over all of them, as his command of the English idiom is masterly and knowledge of contemporary Western audience and their taste unmatched. His own original poems in English also made their appearance periodically in journals and anthologies, though with moderate success, and leading to the common verdict that a translation was his forte. It is not known if he himself was aware of the full impact which those Tamil poems had on his poetic thought, imagery, and even style. The epigraph poem that Ramanujam has chosen for his second collection, called Relations, released in 1971, indicated that he wanted to make it clear that the poems included in the volume have drawn their sustenance from what the Tamil poem connotes. He renders the Purananuru piece into English as follows. This is the Tamil poem found in Purananuru, and this becomes the epigraph poem, is a translation, epigraph poem of that collection of his own poems in English, Relations. This is the Tamil poem. அதழ் எறிந்தன்ன நெடுவெண் களரின் ஒருவன் ஆட்டும் புல்வாய் போல ஓடி உய்தலும் கூடுமன் ஒக்கல் வாழ்க்கை தட்குமா காலே. This is how he translates it. Like a hunted deer on the wide white salt land, a flayed hide turned inside out, one may run, escape, but living among relations binds the feet. The Tamil poet says that the life with one's own kith and kin will fetter one's legs, whereas to redeem oneself, one has to run away from them, just as a hunted deer, in order to escape, has to cross a long white stretch of wet soiled, slippery land resembling the peeled skin placed inside out. For every individual, it is going to be an ordeal either way, running away from relations or living with them. In the poems that follow, Ramanujan articulates his recollections of life with his mother, father, aunts and uncles, from whose clutches he has escaped, but not without risking everything. Ramanujan believes in writing in images, though he knows it is a hit and miss affair subject to change. This is about his own poems in English. Images are in God's plenty in the Sangam poems, and their variety, subtlety and sophistication are equally amazing. Many of these ancient poets are now known by the striking images they have employed. As Ramanujan himself remarks, using a Sangam poet's metaphor, the poems are not the result of rapid composition like oral epics, but of subtle care and reworking. வைகள் எண்தேர் செய்யும் தச்சன் திங்கள் வலித்த காலன்னோனே. Like a chariot wheel made thoughtfully over a month by a carpenter who tosses off 8 chariots in a day. The Tamil poets' minute and accurate observations of the fauna and flora of the 5 Tamil regions are reflected in the images that they use. That Ramanujan's mind is full of them is evident in his own English poems. In a celebrated Kurundogai poem, Kabilar describes a heron looking for fish in the running waters. யாரும் இல்லை தானே கள்வன் தான் அது பொய்ப்பின் யான் எவன் செய்கோ தினைத்தாள் அன்ன சிறு பசுங்கால ஒழுகுநீர் ஆறல் பார்க்கும் குருகும் உண்டு தான் மணந்த ஞான்றே. Only the thief was there, no one else. And if he should lie, what can I do? The heroine says. There was only a thin-legged heron standing on legs, yellow as millet stems, and looking for lampreys in the running water when he took me. In Ramanujan's own poem, Looking and Finding, herons make their appearance. This is the passage in his poem. He can neither sleep nor wake from the one-legged sleep on this Chicago lake of yachts in full sail, herons playing at sages. But it is in the poem The Striders that Kabilar's description is superbly evoked, herons being replaced by striders. This is what Ramanujan's poem says. And search for certain thin-stemmed, bubble-eyed water bugs. See them perch on dry capillary legs, weightless on the rippled skin of a stream. In another Kurundagai poem, a young heroine wonders if there are others like her, sick for love, spending sleepless nights and hearing, this is the part of the poem, through the big rain blown about by the wind at midnight in the cold month, when the oxen shake off the buzzing flies again and again, the poor thin chime of clappers in the crooked cowbells. Oxen yield place to buffaloes more than once in similar descriptions of Ramanujan's poems. I return from the wide open spaces. Temple employees have whiskered nipples. The street cows have trapezium faces. Buffaloes shake off flies with a twitch of ripples. Again and again, this particular image from the Sangam poems is used in Ramanujan's own English poems. 3 women with baskets on their heads climbing slowly against the slope of a hill, one of them lopsided, balancing between the slope and the basket on the head, a late pregnancy. Buffaloes swatting flies with their tails. This is from the poem Pune Train Window. A Nattinai heroine describes the fishermen who go from the little town in the seaside groves into the sea, spreading and drying meanwhile their nets with many eyes and knots. This is how the nets used by fishermen are described in the Tamil poem, with their nets with many eyes and knots. In Ramanujan's love poem for a wife too, this becomes a beautiful image to describe the past. Unhappy in the morning, to be himself again, the past is still there, a drying net on the mountain. The story goes that the Tamils were able to make extraordinarily thin muslin cloth when the Westerners had not even started wearing clothes. Similes in which muslin, waterfalls, snake skins and steam are compared with one another abound in ancient and medieval Tamil poems. The great Kamban, for instance, compares the single piece of cloth that Sita was wearing with a cloud of steam. Avi Andugil Punaivadu Ondra Andri Veru Ariyal. Avi Andugil. Ramanujan uses all these with acknowledgement. We eat legends and leavings. Remember the ivory, the apes, the peacocks we sent in the Bible to Solomon, the medicines for smallpox, the similes for muslin, wavering snake skins, a cloud of steam. The poem Prayers to Lord Murugan. And then one sometimes sees waterfalls as the ancient Tamils saw them, wavering snake skins, cascades of muslin. The other poem, Waterfalls in a Bank. One of the Purananuru poems describes a king's prosperity in terms of the tuskers he possesses, comparing them with cows and stones with buffaloes. எருமையன்ன கருங்கல் இடைதோறும் ஆனில் பறக்கும் யானைய முன்பின் கானக நாடனை நீயோ பெருமை. This is the Purananuru poem. You are the lord of the land, in whose forest elephants roam like a huge herd of cows amidst buffalo-like dark stones. The buffalo stone comparison is to be found in other Tamil poems like Malaipadugadam also. Ramanujan comes out with a modified version of it in his poem A River. The wet stones glistening like sleepy crocodiles, the dry ones shaven water buffaloes lounging in the sun. A Kurundagai heroine claims that a love for a man of the mountain slopes is bigger than earth, higher than the sky, and more unfathomable than the sea. In an exquisite piece on anxiety, the poem is called Anxiety, Ramanujan's reworking of this set of comparisons attains remarkable success. He says, flames have only lungs, water is all ice, earth has bone for muscle, and the air is a flock of invisible pigeons, but anxiety can find no metaphor to end it. Ramanujan's creative adaptations of Sangam lyrics and his conscious or unconscious borrowings from them reveal his admiration for classical Tamil poetry. There are poems by him which articulate his annoyance, agony, and even anger at any uncritical acceptance of tradition in matters religious, secular, or aesthetic. He wants contemporary poets, modern as well as postmodern, to be true to their experience. In a note on his English renderings of selections from Paribadal, a late classical anthology of poems on Murugan, Thirumal and Vaigai, he points out that the poems in Paribadal on Thirumal and Murugan are the earliest bhakti poems in India, the earliest religious poems in a mother tongue. Each of the 8 musical compositions on the Madurai river Vaigai, earlier known as Vaiyai, describes in an almost set pattern the river in roaring spate, the procession of men and women rushing to enjoy the sight and to bathe, the play of young couples in the river, the brief fits of sulks of young ladies, and the reconciliations with their lovers, and finally the grandeur of the river itself. In Ramanujan's poem A River, the celebrated Vaiyai becomes anonymous and dries to a trickle in the sand, Vaiyai with no water. The romantic scenes are replaced by tragic occurrences, and the present generation of bards totally blind to reality or castigated. The English poem by Ramanujan. The new poets still quoted the old poets, but no one spoke in verse of the pregnant woman drowned with perhaps twins in her, kicking at blank walls even before birth. The best known poem of Kurundogai, which Ramanujan has translated with admirable skill, glorifies love at first sight, love between total strangers. That is this poem, Yayim Nyayim Yaragiyoro, Yendayim Nundayim Yemmurai Kelir, Yanum Niyim Yevvadi Aridum, Sembula Pale Neer Pole, Anbudai Nenjam Kalandanave. But the modern poets, that is Ramanujan's experience of love and wedded life, calls for a totally different evocation of family relationships. In his poem he says, really what keeps us apart at the end of years is unshared childhood. You cannot, for instance, meet my father. He is some years dead. Neither can I meet yours. He has lately lost his temper and mellowed. The bond between brother and sister seems to be stronger than the one between man and wife in Ramanujan's poems. The absence of shared childhood may even threaten the harmony of marital life, he says. Probably only the Egyptians had it right. Their kings had sisters for queens to continue the incest of childhood into marriage. Ramanujan's reaction to the past becomes almost hysterical where religious sentiments are concerned. Tirumurugatru Padai, Another late classical Tamil poem is modelled upon an Aatrupadai or guide poem of the Sangam period, in which one poet leads another to a philanthropist chieftain. In the religious poems by Nakirar, in this particular religious poem by Nakirar, it is the devotees of Lord Murugan who are guided to the holy places associated with him. Expressing his undoubted admiration for the poem, Ramanujan says, the 6 sections of the Guide to Murugan celebrate 6 holy places which are identified with his 6 faces. In this poetic act, the poem, the god and the country become homologues of one another. This long poem is the first great bhakti poem in Indian literature. Also, he has translated the 5th and 6th sections of the poem, one on all the dwelling places of the god, the other on his dances. In the 5th section, which in Ramanujan's words evokes a community, joyous, erotic, dancing, with a shaman in their midst who wears the red one's insignia, his lance, red robes of Lord Murugan, and becomes him that provokes the modern poet to come out with his uncharitable, indignant, at times undignified attack on all the Hindus and their eccentricities. This is done in his poem, English poem. Several strange requests are made to the ancient Dravidian god of fertility, joy, youth, beauty, war and love. This is a poem by Ramanujan. Lord of headlines, help us read the small print. Lord of the 6th sense, give us back our 5 senses. Lord of solutions, teach us to dissolve and not to drown. Deliver us, O presence, from proxies and absences, from Sanskrit and the mythologies of night and the several round table mornings of London, and return the future to what it was. Lord, return us. Bring us back to a litter of 6 new pigs in a slum and a sudden quarter of harvest. Lord of answers, cure us at once of prayers. The irreverence, the parody, the ironic juxtaposing of the sublime and the ridiculous, the series of paradoxes and the amusing and curious play with words make his poem a postmodernist prayer, though born of an ancient bhakti poem. It is in her preface to the new edition of Poems of Love and War that Molly A. Daniels Ramanujan, that is his wife, points out, though sketchily, Ramanujan's indebtedness to Sangam poetry for his own creativity. This is what she says about Ramanujan's original poetry in English. As he continued to work on poems of love and war, his own poems began to be able to say the most complicated things with a minimum of words. He learned to draw on place and time and person in the best tradition of drawing from Aham and Puram landscapes. That is, Ramanujan is indebted to Sangam poetry in this way, that is what she says. He learned to use the telling detail from time and place to catch a dramatic situation in his own poems. The impact of the more than 2000 Sangam lyrics on Ramanujan's writings is to be seen not only in the choice of appropriate background, economy of diction, striking images and other techniques, but even in his vision of life also. Thank you.